just by chance I came across Amy Titel, right? And she was talking about Gemini. I have the link for that video as well. And out comes this image saying that, oh, Gemini could have landed on the moon. And here's the schematic for it.
Yep.
And the next one is supposed to be an image of them orbiting the Earth at 285 miles off the surface.
Okay.
And except that one cloud got in the way.
No, pity about that, yeah.
Yeah, all the other pictures, it's going along with them looking in high orbit, and then this picture shows up.
NEXUS Magazine, the world's leading alternative news magazine. This is the new edition, just out in the UK, beginning of next month, beginning of August. It'll be in the US and Canada the following month. Conversations with an artificial intelligence. For real. Urinary tract infections, naturally cured. Personalized warfare, humans are the new battlefield. Well, we knew that. Initiating war with false flag events. We know what false flag events are. Came out in the 19th century when a ship would fly the flag of the enemy, so it wasn't attacked by the enemy, so it could get in close to the enemy and attack them, hence false flag. Localized climate change revelations, well, that's an ongoing story. And the scientific benefits of structured living water. The work of Victor Schauberger and Grander. And then a fascinating article on the Great Pyramid.
I'm going to show you this because he has almost 3 million subscribers. His channel is called Today I Found Out. So he has this little thing here, and all this, what goes through here is all he does is attack Bill Casing in this video. And he says, oh, the moon rocks are real, this is real, that's real, and he talks about Rocketdyne and stuff like that, right? Somebody obviously writes the script because he doesn't do any research. So then I went looking through some of his other videos. I went back to his oldest ones, and he's got one way back here. And he's talking about testing of dogs in a vacuum chamber. And I have the documents. I have the PDF documents on that from their testing. And it's absolutely disgusting what they were doing with these animals. But he claims that they had them in vacuum chambers up to 90 minutes. The dogs, like, you see this, oh, they get a bit of a headache because they were in the vacuum chambers. He's claiming that the dogs swelled up to nearly twice their size. And then after a few hours, they came back down to normal again. The documents I have, they were testing at 70,000 feet, and it killed the dogs in 1.7 seconds on average. Then he goes on from there. Oh, he's got this guy right here. This guy did a 1960 high-flying leap, right? And apparently one of his gloves lost pressure, so his hand swelled up. That's what it claims in here. Only his hand, just because the glove wasn't fitting right. Nothing else was affected. And then we go to here. Apparently this astronaut on the ISS suffered a micrometeor impact on his hand, and they're just showing the little circle of it right there, right? And it punched a hole in his glove while he was out on an EVA. This is the effect he had on the thing. It kind of, the vacuum kind of, I guess it was chilled it down and gave him a freezer burn or whatever on his hand. They have it, it's actually listed. He stayed out there for 10 hours and 49 minutes. He stayed out for a total spacewalk with a hole in his glove. And this guy can get out and put this kind of garbage out. But how could you have a suit, pressurized suit, you have damage? It's a 1/8 hole that a micrometeor punched, a 1/8 hole in your glove. To punch a hole in your glove while you're wearing the glove, it's going to punch a hole through your hand at the same time. And you're not going to stay out for 10 hours and 49 minutes on an EVA with a damaged hand, number one. And second of all, you'd be dead within a second in that vacuum.
Yep.
Does anybody here in the panel have any idea of the number of micrometeoroid hits on spacesuits in the last 50 years? Is there a record of that? any damage, any recorded damage done. See, I find that very strange that there isn't a recorded history of micrometeoroid hits on astronauts or manned space missions. You have them recorded for unmanned missions, specifically for that purpose, but you don't hear of any hits outside of that. I was just wondering if there's a record of that. Does NASA keep a record?
That's the very first of me hearing about any damage to a spacesuit.
Isn't that strange that we're just hearing this for the first time, considering they've been in orbit for X amount of years and, decades actually? I find that peculiar. I mean, we're always told that there's millions of micrometeoroids shooting through space at any given moment, thousands maybe, or even hundreds if you wanted to go down to hundreds in the vicinity of the Earth and the Moon. I find it very strange that there's never been a recorded hit on a manned mission. I'm just putting that out there. Maybe it's true what they're saying, but when you send an unmanned probe up specifically for that purpose, they record all these hits. I've talked about this in my books, but interestingly enough, you don't hear about hits on the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions. I think you heard one on the space shuttle, I'm not sure, but I'm just curious as to why there isn't a list from NASA, a recorded list over the decades of recorded hits on manned missions. I find that strange.
James Webb telescope got hit.
But I'm talking about manned
But
missions.
Voyager's been out there for how many years?
Yeah.
I just watched a video on it that they still figure they'll be able to communicate for a few more years with it.
That's my point. You can name all these unmanned missions that have had recorded hits, but you never, strangely enough, hear of micrometeoroid hits on manned missions. I just find that interesting.
That's the first one I came across claiming that somebody was actually struck. It actually punched a 1/8 inch hole in his suit, and yet only his hand was affected just in the area where the hole was.
Is that 1/8 of an inch? That's serious.
And he stayed outside
Yeah.
for 10 hours and 49 minutes, and the only affected area on his hand was the skin where the hole was.
So let me get this right. You're saying that this astronaut stayed out knowing, and he knew he had a hit on his hand, his glove, and he stayed out knowing that he stayed out for several more hours?
10 hours and 49 minutes.
Right there. There's something wrong with that narrative.
Here's my problem. This guy on his I just found out is just putting jibber jabber out there.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no contact. Here's the problem. He has 3 million subscribers that are listening to this garbage.
Can I ask a question? Because I don't know about this. So I just want to ask any three of you, because I haven't really studied the spacesuits per se, right? I've studied the spaceships and all other the elements that are involved. Could somebody come back and argue that, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, could somebody come back and argue that, okay, do these space gloves, are they separate from the spacesuit, meaning they're compartmentalized, the atmosphere?
No, they're not.
Okay, good. I knew that's what you were going to say, because somebody could argue that. But even with that, you are at a milliseconds moment from being destroyed or killed from anything like this in space. And this Yahoo is floating around out there for 10 hours after knowingly had damage to his glove. That's the narrative?
You can fake it just as easily as you can a helicopter, right, Robert?
Have you seen the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner hour? This is what this sounds like.
We did a video with Woody Woodpecker.
Do you know where that came from? I was just looking at it this morning. It came from the Earth to the Moon.
It's a documentary prepared by Disney. Woody Woodpecker gets in a rocket in the animation and goes to the moon. And they're showing how the jet works by, going fire, fire, fire. They're using a gun to fire the thing. And then he gets to the moon and he said, oh, it's easy to come back because it's downhill all the way. Well, you have to look up at the moon, so it's downhill all the way. So it's easy to come back.
The thing to remember, too, with Gus Grissom, he was part of it as well. Gus Grissom was part of the whole network, but I just want to add, Gus Grissom, for whatever reason, I don't quite know, he changed. He stood out from the rest. He realized he didn't want to be part of this deception, and I think that's why he was putting out, I would say, more than hints to the mainstream media that all was not right here. And now it's interesting that his whole family believed that there was a lot more going on. There was something more nefarious going on behind what happened to him in Apollo 1 and the other two astronauts.
Well, his family have come out publicly and stated he was murdered.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very powerful statement to make, because if you're wrong, If that's incorrect, you can be sued. Nobody has sued Scott Grissom, that's his son, or Betty Grissom, that was his wife, who've also made statements to that effect. So one has to conclude that he was speaking the truth. He'd be up in court for libel or slander if he was speaking it. But he wasn't. So those are questions, many of the questions, that NASA have yet to address, which is always the problem, because NASA will not address these questions. They will not discuss them. NASA will not put anybody up in front of us to challenge what we're saying. And we would assume that somebody from NASA would have the knowledge to be able to correct any mistakes that we've made in what we're saying. But they haven't. They've ignored us, or they tried to. They can't ignore us because they know that what we're saying has a degree of validity, and an increasing number of people are now looking at what we're saying. And from the comments that we see under the films that Robert posts, they agree with what we're saying. And some of the things are fairly outrageous, you might think.
Well, I think one of the biggest things about people making comments under there, it's hard to take anybody seriously when they don't do any research. Somebody like that guy I just found out today with the amount of views that he has. Well, if you're going to do the research, here we are. Contact us. Talk to us. Have a look at what we have to say.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Have a conversation with us. I'll show you a few things that'll straighten people out in a hurry, right? They don't want to see it.
Yeah.
And when you really sit down and do the numbers, and Randy's done the numbers, right? Those rockets just don't work, right? And then we've got Ralph Renee, we've got Cooper, we've got James Collier, we've got all of those guys. And don't forget Jack White.
Jack White did a great deal of very important work, mainly on the photographs, which for anybody who's interested to see what Jack White did, he started by looking at the Kennedy assassination and the photographs involved with that. He was now so familiar with how photographs work, because he was a photo analyst, that's his job. He decided to have a look at the Apollo photographs, because that followed the Kennedy assassination, obviously. And he started looking at it, and the more he looked at it, the more he started to find errors. And in fact, it was a conversation I had on Coast to Coast, probably about 20 years ago. And Jack White was listening and made contact with me after that interview and said, I've got these photographs, do you want to have a look at them? Because I was talking about Apollo, and I said, yeah, I'll send them over. So we sent them over, and I forwarded on quite a lot of them to David Percy at the Owlist website. And David, being a photographer, knew what was being referred to, was familiar with the Apollo problems, we'll call them that. And eventually, David posted the whole of Jack White's work onto the Owlist website, where it will be permanently available. Jack White passed away about 3 years ago, but his work lives on, and it is extremely important. A lot of people are looking into it now and agreeing with it, because you can't disagree with these things, some of the points he made. Some of the anomalies he points out, some may be a little bit dubious, I don't know.
Had he had the equipment that we have today for the computers and the speed and availability of the photographs, how easily we can access these photographs today, and the power of our computers technology today, because even when I was looking, I was back on an 800, 600 display, right? And as soon as you upgrade and you're sitting here with a nice flat screen and a better video card, and you can do more with it, and you can download the photographs easier, then things start to come into play. He had a difficult time. He would have spent hours just to download the images themselves. The software capabilities to look at photographs quickly and easily, like they are today, right? Like he'd pull a picture up and wait for it to load. I mean, people don't understand that.
When was the bulk of his work done?
About 20 years ago, so he's before the days of Photoshop and before the days of photo manipulation. But he'd passed all the work that he'd done and the descriptions, and David Percy's been through it and annotated it, and put them. There are about 200 photographs he's got up on the Owlist website that Jack identified problems with. And there are problems that many people now still recognize as being major problems, because Jack was very thorough in what he was doing.
Well, he was actually finding stuff on the surface in those images that were quite mechanical, like when he started looking and he said, oh, there's a wrecker in the background or whatever, right? and stuff like that. And he was actually pulling car parts. He had a license plate on one of them, I think. When you continue on with better technology, you realize it's an actual junkyard.
It's probably the junkyard at Flagstaff.
Everything that I have looked at, it has to be outdoor, and you wouldn't possibly build an indoor set and bring all of that equipment in, all of the stuff that's there.
Hence the white flag.
And people say, you think you're discrediting the U.S. or the American flag or whatever the hell it is. I think it's absolutely brilliant. They're throwing cars and planes and everything else in, and they didn't recycle metal the same as they do today, right? They simply buried it. What better? You've got the largest pieces of moving equipment, earth-moving equipment going on, and it's absolutely brilliant because you can create the set and bury it over, and if anybody says, what's that? Oh, that's a junkyard. And they're not going to go look in a junkyard.
That one person sent you a photograph of a sign right outside of that major military junkyard.
Said you will be shot, yeah.
This is a military landfill site. Shot?
Well, keep the military secrets under wrap. Neil said you just have to peel back the layers to get to the truth. And if you scoop that dirt away a little more, you're going to see more of it in those photographs.
But of course, they're not really willing to do it officially. It's down to people like us to come up with the possible solution. But because we can't go onto the landfill site at Flagstaff in Arizona and dig it up ourselves because it's a site that is restricted by the military for obvious reasons, therefore they can get away with it. And there are still people, I mean, that guy Feinberg that we came across, which about Apollo being faked because you can't see stars in the photographs and the flags are waving or not waving. I mean, what sort of astronomer makes comments like that without checking it out?
Well, he has no knowledge. They put that article up and they say, oh, he's got a PhD. He's probably never turned a wrench in his entire life. He's looking through a little telescope with his little club, so he's more like Peter Bassett.
What did that guy say? He could see the lunar rover and everything that they left on the moon with his backyard telescope.
That's in the comment section right now.
It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, any astronomer will know you can't use a telescope to see what's on the moon. It's basic mathematics and physics. And to make comments like that indicate they are either not astronomers, or they're not mathematicians, or they're not physicists, or they're fantasists. The idea that you can see stuff on the moon with a backyard telescope is absolute rubbish.
Even Stephen Bassett, when he does his stuff trying to debunk the moon stuff, right? He's talking about Hubble. And he explains why Hubble cannot see anything on the lunar surface.
Yeah, exactly.
And he says, physically, the lens has to have 10 times the physical size and 10 times the power. And then, if there was a lander sitting there, it would be a couple of pixels across. That's all you're really going to see on it. And then have these guys come in there and say, I've got images, I've looked at the rover and this and that with my backyard telescope. Well, I responded to him and I said, well, just send me the make and model of the telescope. And the images, I haven't heard back from them.
Well, it's the same narrative when people say that China and India have photos of the Apollo landing sites, and they don't. They have photos of possibly the area, but they don't show anything at all. Nothing, no remnants, nothing of anything that indicates that the Apollo program landed on the surface. And recently I'm hearing it, oh, well, they have photos. And then the best one was when somebody said that the Chinese have photos from their unmanned mission. And I said, well, post them. He said, well, they haven't been released.
So how did they see them?
Yeah, so they're going to take the Chinese government at its word. And a lot of people doubt their own government here in North America, but they'll take the Chinese government at its word, given its history of human abuse, human rights abuses. That, to me, is an act of desperation on behalf of the Apollo proponents. That's what that is.
Yeah.
To Marcus's point that Marcus has made, and I agree, debate me and prove me wrong, or at least put up a good counter-argument, and leave the insults out. Because when they start dropping down to insults, I've had to block several people on my YouTube channel because of this. And I know that you too, Robert, have done the same thing. That's not an argument. that's an act of desperation. Marcus, you were mentioning earlier about the fact that you've asked people to come forward and debate you. I've done the same thing, and I always get one excuse after the other. They find a way out of it. You know, they'll denigrate you, they'll try to discredit you, you don't know what you're talking about. And there was one on there that was going back and forth for a year saying, well, tell me exactly what it is you want to talk about. I said, I'll talk about anything you want to talk about. You can decide what the agenda is going to be, except for the photographs, because I'm just not an expert on that. So I leave that up to Marcus and Scott and Robert. I don't discuss that because I just don't have the expertise. Or I haven't studied it. All right, I find it intriguing. That's why I put it in my book. But I put it in my book representing your work. But I don't discuss that. But other than that, I'll discuss anything else. So here's what they do. One said to me, show me that you can prove what it is you're talking about, and I will discuss it with you online. And, you know, that's not how a debate works. You get into a debate with somebody, you agree to talk about anything, and if something comes up, I'll admit I don't know. If I don't know about it, I'll say I don't know about it. But specifically talk about maybe what's in my book. Okay, ask me about that. You know I've written about these subjects, and yet you refuse to discuss those subjects with me. That's what my point is.
Who was the guy that you sent me and I said I would have a debate with him?
So that was Justin Cox. Justin Cox right now is one of the few I have not blocked from my YouTube channel. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he's indicating to me, if he sees this video, he's one of the NASA proponents, and you know we all know him very well, but he's indicating to me in an email that he may be open to some of the things that we have been talking about. Now, I don't know if he's being honest, I don't know if he's being sincere, but I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt. Unlike the others, they're not even worth talking about. So what I've noticed with Justin Cox is, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, is that he seems to be having some questions about what it is he had been defending for the last few years himself. That's the impression that I'm getting from him. Maybe he has an ulterior motive, I don't know, but on the surface he seems to, at least I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for now, on the surface he seems to be saying he wants to talk. And he actually asked to do a series of videos with me, and I've sort of backed off right now because I'm kind of busy with other stuff, right? I have another book I'm writing right now, so I'm really busy with that, knee-deep in research and writing. So I didn't say no, I left it on hold. Now, let's see where he's going to go with this. Let's see how this works out. And I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt until he gets, if he does get nasty again, and then I write him off. It's not a black and white thing. You're not going to get them over here right away. They have to work their way over, and it takes a long time to undo that programming. Marcus, you know so much about this.
It's been going on for so long now. So many people have come up and said, oh, you're an idiot, you're a complete fool. Now, the point is, I'm used to that. I'm so used to that, not just with Apollo, but way back. There is a way in which you can defend yourself against those sort of attacks. As soon as you recognize them for what they are, and I think you've recognized it very easily, as soon as somebody starts applying personal insults, you know they've lost the argument.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't have to do that if they had a strong argument against what you're saying. But they don't. So they have to come up with personal insults. And the reason I think a lot of people won't be prepared to put their face on Skype and discuss this is because they know that we know that they have personally insulted us. And they're embarrassed to appear and to be questioned about it because they have no answer to it.
What happened a few weeks ago is Simon Dan grabbed one of our videos and put it up on his channel.
What he did was he ran the entire video in pieces, but he picked the best ones out where I had the flag in the editor, and I had it going slowly over all the wet stuff, like the really wet stuff. He puts it up and he doesn't edit it, and we're going, this is great. You go to his comment section now, and there's people saying, hey, Dan, that flag is wet.
He was chastising me in my video for saying, no way, there's no way that they could have gone from all the problems they had in Apollo 4 to launching 7 months later another Saturn V with a crew on board. And I was saying there's just no way they would have had the time. And he was chastising me for saying no way. And yet he was saying there's no way Randy is right. It's basically what he was saying. So he was using my own argument back at me, saying, well, there's no way Randy's right. Well, Randy says there's
thought
no
you were
way the
gonna
rocket
fight.
could have been fixed in time, and he's saying there's no way Randy was right. He never offered anything.
I would suspect that Simon Dan will not come on and talk to any of us
Nope.
because he doesn't know as much as we do about the real Apollo story and how it's been faked. He doesn't know that, so he will be shown up as a bit of a naive critic who doesn't know really what he's talking about, because that's why he keeps insulting us. He's not prepared to come on screen publicly, answer questions which we will ask him. You see, if these people come back to you and say, you're wrong, this, and I know that you're wrong, and make all the insults that they do, they never, ever come back with real hard scientific evidence to demonstrate why they think you're wrong, even though they may be wrong. But they never do that. They just make these insults. And that's why it's really not to our advantage to even respond to them. It'd be nice if they came on and discussed it, because then we'd be on level terms. Justine Cox and all the other parrots who have done their bit or tried to do their bit. We're still here. We're still prepared to show our faces, discuss these things. They're not. You know, they make up ridiculous names that they go under.
Yeah.
And they think they're being sensible. Whether they're paid by NASA or not, I don't know, and I don't really care very much either.
They make their money using NASA as a backdrop on the thing. Randy, the biggest problem I find of these people out there talking, I mean, Veritism and Physics Girl, for example, the two of them have videos out, and the mathematics on there is just absolutely absurd. Physics Girl has a PhD. She was talking about orbital mechanics, right? And you can look her up, orbital mechanics for Physics Girl, right? And you can watch her do this stuff on how the ISS is in orbit. And she sits there and shows you the mathematical formula in which they're doing this for. And of course there's a comment saying, well, the military don't use this formula for ballistics kind of thing. And I'm going, well, why not? Because they have to know what the gravitational drop rate is going to be of a bullet. But if they're being taught that, they have absolutely no possibility to contribute to any kind of scientific research. They are nothing more at this point than parrots. And Veritism is exactly the same way. He's got one called Gravity Has No Force. And he's using the same mathematical formula. What they're doing is they're removing the mass of the object in the formula, which is the kinetic energy. So now the object will react exactly, because it has no mass or energy or kinetic energy. It's now basically a photon of light. That's why you can't use it ballistically, because there's no way to have an impact. But the Veritism is quite simple, because he says now the ISS goes around the space-time continuum warp around the Earth, right? So it's actually traveling in a straight line, the same as light does. And that's its orbit. It's traveling in a straight line as it goes around. Well, if that's the case, then as the sunlight hits, it would travel around the same way and there'd be no nighttime. I mean, just silly, but he does that. And Physics Girl does the same thing with the same formula to explain it, and how people just float around in space outside the craft, right?
I have something to say about that when it comes to formulas. I mean, I've been out of school for decades, so my math, I don't pretend to say my math is great. It's not. But what I do have is knowledge and common sense. And Marcus and I sort of touched on this in our last discussion on Skype. And we know that anything in a classroom, going back to let's use an example of this, going back to the very first passenger jet airliner, it was all worked out in a classroom on a blackboard, because they had no computers in classrooms back then in the early 1950s, and they came out and designed to formula specifications the Comet, which was the first passenger jet. I think it was back in 1953. So what happened? They did all the tests and everything like that and went into service until catastrophic failure, the loss of several hundred lives. Even though they said they had the formula correct from the engineering point of view, they had found a design flaw in the airframe, and the passenger windows were too large, so they weren't strong enough to withstand the inside pressure when they were up at 30,000 feet, and it just blew. You can apply that same formula to the Apollo missions, is that yes, you can formulate on a blackboard in a classroom, this is how it's going to work from the Earth to the Moon and the Moon back to Earth. But there's so many variables involved along the way, there needs to be many recalculations done, and the only thing that can do that is a computer. that has to continuously update every second. Well, you humans can't do that. By the time we react, it's too late. So we need a computer to do that, and that computer in the Apollo mission, the Apollo guidance computer, was not capable of doing that. It had to be fed information from star sightings that had to be visually taken from the astronauts and then fed into the computer, and then to properly align the computer. What if there was a pending emergency, like 2 or 3 or 4 seconds in the future? By the time the astronauts saw this and then radioed back Houston to send us up the correct formula or the correct calculations, it's over. Yeah. You need a computer to be able to do that. And this is why when I hear people like Physics Girl and anyone else for that matter saying they don't know the math, they don't know the math either, because they don't know the math is how it applies to their to actual reality.